Welcome back to the reflection room. I hope you guys are doing really well. I feel like 2026 is going by fast already. I just wish, do you guys ever wish that sometimes things would just like slow down? I feel that way. I've been feeling that way the last few days. Yeah, I feel like it's going by super, super fast. Over the last day or two, I've been thinking about, and so I thought I'd like hop on here and just kind of get my thoughts out a little bit and reflect and chat with you guys on. Is this I've been and it's natural. You guys are probably seeing it too. It's expected on social media or even with friends and stuff like that. During this time, you see a lot of people making like New Year's resolutions and goals, all the things, right? Which I'm someone that is absolutely for that, but I'm not boasting here, but I tend to kind of, for the most part, kind of stick with them, but that's just kind of more of a personality thing, honestly, than anything else. So goals work well for me. I know, for some people they don't, but they do for me. So I love it. I usually am around this time like all for it. So I think it's great. I know some people think like resolutions are like setting people up for failure. So to each their own, whatever. But I just think you see kind of the same kinds of stuff, right? So you see the going to the gym and eating better and dieting, right? And like weight loss. And what else do you see? You see a lot of like vision board stuff. You see a word of the year. You'll see fasting, especially for like some like religious sects and stuff like that. So you'll see fasting for like 21 days, beginning of the year type thing. Yeah, just like those are kind of like the typical things that you'll see, or you'll see dry January. So you'll see that. I'm trying to think of like, or like quarter one goals. Those are like the typical stuff, right? I might be missing some just because it's like not in my algorithm, but which I think all of those things are great, right? So you hear the no sugar, that's another one, right? You'll hear like no sugar, no social media. People like get off of social media for a little bit, or like will declutter their space. Like that's something I did like a week ago. It's just kind of go through my closet and like anything I haven't worn recently, I'm like, why am I keeping this, right? So this is what I wanted to talk about, but nobody talks about the detox that, in my opinion, I think matters the most, or maybe the second most, or something along those lines. And for me, I think it's a friendship or relationship detox. Okay, so here's the thing. Has this ever happened to you where there's a moment where you realize like someone who you thought was a friend was actually an enemy? Like, and I know I'm using a strong word, right? Enemy is a strong word. I get it, but I don't know what other word I might put in there. But let's just go with it for effects, where they would use like backhanded comments. Maybe there was a bit of like secret jealousy, or you found out that they were sharing your business, like personal information in secrecy behind your back, or quietly like celebrating in your failures, or kind of making joke or light of them, where you're just like, wait a minute, this isn't something that a friend would do. Like this, your words, like you saying like I'm a friend of yours, and then your behaviors aren't matching. There's some kind of like disconnect or dissonance that's happening here. And so I want to talk a little bit today for a few minutes about why relational detox matters. As a mental health counselor, I see this all the time. People think it's so important to do a food fast, which think it's great. I've done a few of those myself, or a social media break, or there's a new gym membership, that people sign up for. The other day yesterday actually, last night, I saw the infamous class pass, I think it's called. And they almost got me, I have to admit. But the same exhausting, disrespectful relationships are still on your calendar, still in your group chats, still in your DMs. And then we wonder why we're anxious, we're still comparing ourselves, we're still doubting ourselves, and none of that stuff ever really shifts, and And I think sometimes our mindset isn't necessarily the problem. It's the people that keep reinforcing that same old story that are still in our lives. So I wanted to kind of highlight some of the red flags that I think are important to kind of notice. And then I wanted to go over 2 to 3 important questions I think that are, maybe worth pausing and asking yourself as you have 1 or 2 people in mind to see, to reflect on and see if they're, it's maybe worth auditing those relationships as they currently are, in your life. So some of the red flags to maybe kind of look out for: do they downplay your wins or maybe get a little bit weird whenever you have some kind of success in your life? Do they use your vulnerability against you? Or maybe you've noticed it's come back around like 1 or 2 times they've talked behind your back, but they have a really good excuse or justification for doing so. Do you ever feel like smaller around them or anxious or maybe on edge after spending time with them instead of walking away feeling supported and uplifted and edified after, you've spent some good quality time with them? Do you feel sometimes like that relationship, for whatever reason, you can't put your finger on it, but it just doesn't necessarily feel safe or secure? Here are 2 to 3 questions that I think it's worth maybe pausing and taking some time to kind of ask yourself. But before we do that, I want you to think about a relationship or 2 that maybe I think it's worth exploring, maybe kind of silently thinking about and kind of running through. And we know which relationships, which friendships those are. And so we're gonna maybe potentially think about these relationships and assess whether or not we need to go on a relationship fast with these specific relationships. And so here are 3 questions that I think, it's worth maybe asking yourself. So question 1 is, who do I always have to shrink, over explain, or defend myself around? Who consistently leaves me feeling anxious, guilty, or not enough, even if they never say it directly? And 3, who has shown me through repeated behavior that they don't respect my boundaries or my growth? So as you ask yourself those questions, maybe it might even be important to kind of rewind a little bit, maybe jot them down and journal about them for a day or 2, or possibly even tuck those questions away. And the next time you're with that person or those people that you thought of a few minutes ago, then maybe come home, pull those questions out and answer them, since your interactions with those people are fresh, right? At the forefront of your mind. Answers to those questions are your invitation to emotionally step back, to maybe set some new boundaries, or, in some cases to go on a relationship fast, or maybe even something a little bit more permanent to release those relationships from your life. Sometimes these changes that you decide to make with your relationships, they don't necessarily have to be these big dramatic breaks. So when I have these conversations with my clients in my counseling spaces, and we're talking about, let's say a friendship, or an acquaintance, sometimes I get asked, but it's going to feel so awkward, or I don't want to have this like big eruption or this explosion, let's say relational explosion, where I'm having to answer all these questions and it just becomes so dramatic, and I don't want to have to deal with that. And the reality is you don't have to. Sometimes these kinds of relational fasts, right, is kind of what I'm calling them, but these relationship detox, or these changes in relationship statuses, sometimes it might even look like something as simple as fewer invitations to events, gatherings, outings on the weekends, parties, hangouts, going to a coffee shop, right? So fewer invitations, maybe slower replies to text messages, maybe speaking up a little bit more and setting clear boundaries, and then maybe just making a stronger effort to put more energy for the people who actually show up in your life. So I don't know. I think this is an interesting conversation. I hope that I was able to do what I wanted to today, which was just plant the seed. I think sometimes we tend to have blinders on, where the media or our society at large, just wants us to really kind of focus, especially during pivotal seasons like the new year, just to focus on certain changes that we can make in our lives, which I think are great. But sometimes some of those might be driven just by marketing and by things that we can just spend more money on. But I think there are some other changes that we can sometimes make in our lives that we don't necessarily have to spend money on, but we do have the power and the capacity to make those changes in our lives that will have just as much of an impact on our overall mental and emotional health, if not more so. And so I thought that this was one of those that I think doesn't, really get spoken about as often. And so I thought, why not plant the seed and start that conversation? So thanks so much for having this conversation with me and for just kind of getting into this head of mine and entertaining me as I talked about this topic of relational fast. I've enjoyed it. I hope that you have enjoyed it as much. And I encourage you to continue to do what I love to do, which is to keep reflecting. Thanks so much for joining me, and I'll talk to you soon.